Hey there, welcome to Factually. I'm Adam Conover. Thanks for joining me again. You know, crime has been one of the major stories of the past couple years. If you turn on the local news or Fox, you will be bombarded with news stories about how crime in America is out of control, especially in cities and especially in blue cities. Donald Trump won the election that way by stoking fear about crime, which he blamed on immigrants, and especially violent crime, which he especially blamed on violent immigrants. But you know what? It wasn't just Trump. Both parties, Republican and Democrat, ran on tough on crime messaging. California, a deep blue state, overwhelmingly passed a ballot measure to increase penalties for theft and drug offenses. Colorado, also blue, did something similar. And that means that criminal justice reform, a cause that I care about a lot and have covered for many years on every single one of my platforms and shows, is on the ropes right now. I mean, if you were to ask the average American, or definitely the average politician, you will probably hear that crime in America is spiraling out of control and that we got to do something about it. But here's the crazy thing. When you look at the actual crime data, that is not the case at all. There was a spike in murder during the pandemic years of 2020 and 2021, but rates are now falling faster than at any time in history, so that we are now very close to the pre-pandemic numbers. Violent crime more broadly is dropping to pre-pandemic levels too. Car thefts are up, sure, but burglary is down, and shoplifting is back to pre-pandemic levels as well. In fact, by some measures, the crime rate is as low as it has ever been since the 70s. So, why is it that public perceptions of crime differ so far from the reality? Are the national numbers just obscuring the local picture? Are we being tricked? Or are we just super sensitive to increases in crime? And most importantly, as we discuss in this episode, when you look into crime data and how it is collected, you will realize that there are few pieces of data with more holes and less regularity in reporting than crime data. So why is crime data collecting such a fucking mess in this country? Well, to answer all those questions, we have an incredible guest on the show. Before we get into it, I want to remind you that if you want to support this show and all the conversations we bring you every week, head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. $5 a month gets you every episode of this show ad-free. And if you like stand-up comedy, and I hope you do, please come see me on the road. I am touring my brand new hour of comedy right now. It's called the Nihilism Pivot Tour. You got to hear this new material. From January 10th through 12th, I will be in Dallas, Texas. From January 23rd through 25th, I'll be in Toronto, Ontario. February 12th, Omaha, Nebraska. February 13th, Minneapolis, Minnesota. After that, I'm going to Chicago, Boston, Burlington, Vermont, London, Amsterdam, Providence, Rhode Island, and Eugene, Oregon. Head to adamconover.net for all those tickets. And now, let's talk about crime. To discuss recent trends in crime and why crime data is so hard to collect, we have one of the foremost experts on crime in America today. His name is Jeff Asher. He's a crime analyst and he's a co-founder of the data analytics firm AH Datalytics. Please welcome Jeff Asher. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So, look, we have two completely opposite stories about crime in this country. There's a lot of people who feel crime is out of control. It's never been worse. America's enveloped in chaos and murder and destruction and death. And then there's other folks who say, actually, if you look at the statistics, or at least many of the statistics, crime is at an all-time low in many ways, or historic low in some respects. So what is the truth about crime in America? Is there a single truth at all?
Well, so the real challenge is crime is a really easy word to say, and it's really poorly defined. So if you want to talk about the major crimes, the stuff that the FBI has been measuring regularly since 1930, yeah, crime is at or near historic lows. And we have good data going back really to the early 1970s. We have data back to the 60s, but it's of so-so quality. And if you want to compare now the rate of crime, major crime, to where it was in the early 70s, it's about the same. It is, and it's been that way for really 10 to 15 years. We had a large increase in murder and gun violence in 2020 and 2021 and into 2022. That has largely resolved. The property crime, auto theft, which has risen the last few years, burglary and theft are at or near historic lows. And violent crime is about where it was in the early 1970s.
Wow.
If you want to talk about crime as other things, shoplifting, you want to talk about disorder, homelessness, things that maybe aren't inherently major crimes or are very difficult to measure crimes, but that lead to a sense of disorder, lead to a sense of unsafety, then you're talking about something that you can't really put a number on it. It's just sort of a feeling, and you can't tell somebody that just because, the major crime numbers are low, that your feeling of a lack of safety is inherently incorrect, or that the city that you're in, maybe your downtown area isn't as safe as it once was in a broad sense, even if the number of crimes being reported successfully has gone down significantly there.
Well, let's pick some of these things apart a little bit, because you mentioned other things that we would call crimes. So the major crimes, homicides, major property crimes, violent crimes, those are the things the FBI tracks. And then in the other bucket, you mentioned shoplifting and homelessness. Now, shoplifting is a crime and something that we would want to not have happen. Homelessness is not a crime. At least I don't think I would define it as one. I think most people would define it as not inherently criminal to not have a home. Do you agree with that?
100%. Not at all criminal. And it's the type of thing that you don't want inherently the criminal justice system being the organization that is solving it, even if we typically put the onus on the criminal justice system. Yep. That said, it's the type of disorder that leads to feelings of unsafety and leads people to maybe not feel particularly safe in an area, even if it is 100% not at all criminal. And so when you ask people, do you feel safe? Do you feel that safety is getting worse? You kind of lump that into the crime bucket, even though a lot of these feelings are not necessarily tied to specifically to crimes occurring.
Yeah, and I've encountered that fear that people have of homelessness. And by the way, we're right into the meat of this right away, so I appreciate you bringing us here, because I think this is part of the core problem. The fear that people have of homelessness is partially based on a certain form of almost bigotry, that like, oh, if I see someone on the street, I imagine they're a criminal. Or a lot of people imagine that homeless people are inherently criminals. Like if I see a homeless person, I'm worried they're going to jump me. That's actually like not fair or the case. However, I do think a lot of that fear is justified in a sense, which is that when you are walking by, I have tent encampments in my neighborhood. I don't feel comfortable walking by them. And part of the reason is because it is evidence that society is breaking down. There are people living on the street. It's not safe for people to be living under overpasses, right? It's not the society that we want to live in. And so it gives people this sense of general disorder. Now, I do visit homeless encampments. I do street engagement with a group called SELA in my neighborhood, et cetera. And so I've been able to sort of remove some of that negative feeling for myself. I have an intimate understanding of the issue, but it's completely, you understand why an average person seeing homelessness in their area would go, things are not going as well in my city as I would hope that they would, right? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And because you've got this situation where the major crimes that get reported, it's kind of hard to gauge, is that up or is that down? And people have no sense of what those numbers were 30, 40, 50 years ago. So you lead to, well, I heard that my neighbor, their cousin got robbed 3 months ago. And you let those anecdotes be the driver of your feelings. And then you put on top of all these senses of disorder. And it basically makes people a poor judges of, is this problem that is measurable? We can figure out around how many murders there were in a given year. And we can say with confidence, it went down or it went up. Yet people are really bad judges of it. And they put it under this large umbrella of crime. And it leads to this constant sense that crime is up, even if it's a poorly understood concept or poorly defined concept, that all of the data shows us is actually going down. It's a really complex feeling that has a simple answer.
Yeah, and it's a feeling that resists any kind of evidence, and it seems as though almost everybody in every city says crime is really bad in the city that they live in. They all say, I'm okay, but things a couple blocks away from me in my city are really bad, even though they may not have experienced it directly. How much of this is the media? I recently went to the webpage of my local NBC affiliate, NBC, whatever it is, 456 Los Angeles. And every single article on the page was, family of two stabbed here, hit and run there, right? It was all violent crime. Now, I live in a city of over 8 million people. Of course, there's going to be a couple crimes every day. But, this particular news outlet was making the choice of every single article on our page is going to be crime. How much does that contribute to the feeling of rising crime that people have?
I think it's a large contributor. There's the old saying that the media doesn't cover the planes that land. And I keep using this phrase. And you remember all the Boeing planes where like the door would fall off and the plane would land and they talk about it?
That was one plane, Jeff. You're doing this yourself. Remember all the Boeing planes? There was one plane where the door fell off, which is horrible. And Boeing is a piece of shit company that needs to be investigated and broken up. But it was one plane. It inflates for us. Yes.
Yeah. And so there's basically, you don't get stories of, hey, nobody was robbed last week. There were no shootings yesterday.
Right.
And so in the absence, and part of this is a data issue. If you want to look up how the Chiefs are doing this year in football, you can tell, oh, look, they just won last night. They're 12-1. If I want to see how many yards, Derek Carr is my quarterback of my Saints. If I want to see how many yards he had, there's a statistic for that. And I can see that. And I can compare through week 13 of every season how Derek Carr is doing. You can't do that with crime very easily. And so in the absence of really strong, clearly communicated data to the public, you get anecdote-driven feelings about it. Your impression of crime is based on anecdote, and that's going to be heavily weighed by the media. And the media is not publishing stories of nothing happening because that's not how media works in any subject matter. And so when you're gauging your feelings on, is this going up or is this going down? You're trying to determine, have I heard more anecdotes this year compared to last year or compared to 30 years ago when all of the data said there were more anecdotes back then than there are now, but you don't remember 30 years ago with any reliability. So your ability to figure all of this out is going to have this enormous bias towards the present, and it's going to lead you to always think that things are getting worse.
So you're saying it's vibes-based. We do not have the clear statistics that we need, and as a result, we are going based on the most recent anecdote that we've heard. Why do we have this problem with statistics? Like so you said a second ago, we have reliable statistics collected by the FBI going back to the 70s, yet we don't have the sort of up-to-date statistics that we need. So walk me through what statistics we do have, what don't we have, and why.
All right, now we're talking about the things people want to hear, which is the history of crime data collection in the United States.
Oh, you came on the right podcast to talk about this. We love to go deep on a topic to find out why we live in the horrible world today. So tell us all about it.
No, this is great because I just published what I called a brief history of national crime statistics on my Substack. So this is very fresh in my memory.
You are my man. This is exactly the guy I want to talk to. Walk us through this history.
All right, so until 1920s, basically, the United States had nothing. And in the 20s, a bunch of police departments got together and said, okay, we're going to start to collect and we're going to standardize what we're collecting. And so in 1930, the Uniform Crime Report was created. And the real challenge, and it's been almost a century and it affects our ability to understand trends today, is that it was created in a voluntary fashion. So agencies report in a voluntary manner. And so from 1930 until 1960, you were getting, a third of agencies up to half. In the 1950s, it got up to about 75% of the country being covered. And then around 1958, 1959, you were getting close to 90%. And it wasn't until 1960 that the FBI started putting out national estimates based on close to 100% of the country's population. Now, not every agency was reporting every year. And it wasn't really until the 1970s that we had what was called state UCR programs, where the agencies report to the state program, the state consolidates it, it standardizes it, and it makes sure the agencies are all doing the right thing. And then the state sends it up to the FBI. The FBI puts it together and puts out their national estimates based on that. So in the 1970s, we start to get really close to 95% of the country reporting data that's actually been standardized in some way and has some sort of quality control around it. In the 80s, 90s, things get better, they get worse. Some states like Illinois, starting in the mid to late 1980s until the middle of the Obama administration, have really shady collection and reporting for most agencies within the state. And you get states like Mississippi that you get 50 to 70% of the state reporting each year. You don't even get above 70% of the state's population being represented.
Wow.
And then you get to today, where last year we were about 95% of the country reporting, but it's voluntary. And so you get random years where big agencies, Phoenix or Tucson, didn't report. You get years like 2021, the FBI switched data reporting systems and you lost 40% of the country's reporting for 2021. And then they backtracked and they said,
that's
okay,
supposedly when crime was spiking 2021.
Right. So it spiked in 2020. The 2021 estimates, when it was still bad, were just as terrible. And you got data that was basically unusable for national estimates. And then the FBI backtracked and said, okay, if you're not reporting under the old system, under the new system, you can report under the old system. And so Los Angeles, for example, no 2021 data exists in the national estimates.
Really?
Pretty much the entire state of California does not exist. New York reported one murder in 2021 to the FBI. So it doesn't exist. And
this is insane.
Some states, it's insane.
Because this is the period when, just to pause for a second, like at this point we have, 2021 and beyond, we have politicians running in both of those states on crime is out of control. We need to end criminal justice reform. We need to lock people up again, We need to pour money into the police, et cetera. This is in the wake of George Floyd's murder at the same moment when like all of California is not reporting crime statistics to the feds.
Yeah. Essentially, that's what happened. And they have backtracked. They have allowed agencies to report under the old system. So we're back to where we were before. It's a lot better collection. But if you want to say how many murders were there in the United States in 2021, you can't do it. And so our real challenge is that it's voluntary. Some states, Minnesota mandates it. State law says you have to report. Other states don't. California being a good example of a place that's just a very difficult place in terms of reporting quality. And you get this system that is sometimes good, sometimes somewhat questionable. And it makes it at times very difficult to speak with precision. And so what you have to do when you're talking about crime data is, we don't know exactly how many murders there were in 2023, but we can say reasonably accurately that there were around 19,000 or so murders last year, and it was around a 12%-ish decline from 2022. And any more level of precision leads to basically questions of, wait, this data isn't exact. And now I've said something precise that there were X number of crimes and it's changed. And you've basically gotten yourself in trouble by speaking with a level of confidence that is not earned from this data.
Wow. I mean, it's just completely insane to me that we're making political and policy decisions based on data that has so many holes in it. And I understand as a matter of statistics, you can sort of fill those holes in and you can adjust and you can say, oh, there's been a decline, but you're really limited in the amount of precision that you have. I also wonder, though, is there not a problem in this data being reported by the enforcement agencies? This is being reported by police departments and sheriff's departments, right? So those agencies are also, their success or failure metrics as, part of the political system are determined by those statistics. Are they not incentivized to adjust the statistics a little bit, right? Well, that wasn't quite a murder. Maybe that's a manslaughter or whatever. I've seen The Wire, right? I know what happens around season 3 or 4, right? The statistics come in, and as soon as your job depends on a statistic, well, now you're trying to change a number rather than change reality. And I can imagine when you have all these different jurisdictions, different departments with their own histories, some of the departments, as we have discussed in a previous episode of this show, are run by criminal gang syndicates in the case of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department and many other sheriff departments around the country. I imagine there's a huge amount of variability in how this data is collected and how much influence the agency has to adjust the numbers up or down.
I mean, I hear it. I never really subscribe to that as a reason not to trust the numbers, just because you can make the argument, they want their budget to go up, so they're going to say there's been a surge in murder, or they want to say that, look, there's all these issues. I think when you look at where there are clear reporting, where we can point to the data is wrong and the agency reported wrong, the issue is not malice. I don't even want to call it incompetence, but it's human error. And so I'll give you 2 examples. One, Greenwood, South Carolina, a city of 20,000 in 2022 reported 58 murders. Now, what they did, for some reason, all of the evidence that I have suggests that they probably had 8 or 9 murders. For some reason, some incidents were coded as murders incorrectly, and they reported to the state of South Carolina 29 murders instead of the 8 or 9 that occurred. And again, for some reason, it got doubled. And so when the FBI reported Greenwood's 20,000 people, that's a murder rate of like 380 per 100,000. It's, 7 times St. Louis's number. If that had been their murder rate, there would have been stories about it. Nothing. And so clearly, digging deep, there was some sort of human error. The other issue, Oakland, California last year reported 10,000 more violent crimes than occurred. And they acknowledged last summer that it was because of human error. And so that actually raised the national violent crime rate by 1% because of human error in Oakland reporting an enormous excess of violent crimes. And it got reported to the state. Everyone agrees that it was an error, and yet the FBI took it in there. Nobody audited it. Nobody removed it. And it led to this issue of an incorrect number that next year will probably be revised down. And so I think that when you look at it, and there's lots of examples, New Orleans, where I am, year after year has been underreporting rape to the FBI. And you look at the numbers and you're like, well, these numbers are clearly wrong. You could, if you dig deep on pretty much any city, you're probably going to find numbers that are from year to year not inherently correct. They're not always an underreporting. They're sometimes an overreporting. And it just, because of the voluntary nature and because it's humans in this enormous system with 19,000 agencies, you're going to have issues.
Yeah. I'll admit it, okay? I'll finally come clean and say it. I'm a little bit of a gadget guy. I gravitate towards devices that make my life a little bit better, a little bit easier, and dare I say, a little more fun. And one device that has inarguably improved my daily routine, one that I use multiple times a day, is my Quip 360 rechargeable electric toothbrush. Quip 360 is a bold, simple design that comes in multiple colors and is ultra quiet. Can't even hear that, can you? For a super clean without being super annoying. It's got built-in 2-minute quadrant timers with 30-second pulses that tells you exactly how long you need to be cleaning your teeth and shuts off when you're done. And a huge feature for me is that it has a pressure sensor that allows me to be merciful on my poor gums since I'm always guilty of brushing them a little bit too hard. Approved by the American Dental Association, Quip 360 is scientifically proven to remove up to 11 times more plaque between teeth compared to a manual toothbrush and provide up to 2 times more whitening on day 1. And if you don't absolutely love your Quip 360, well, guess what? You can return it for free within 30 days. If you do love it, brush easy knowing you get for free a lifetime warranty for purchasing on getquip.com and the opportunity to subscribe to refill heads by mail every 3 months so you never have to go to the store. And get this, just for listeners of Factually with Adam Conover, you can get 20% off site-wide and a free travel case and countertop stand at getquip.com/factually. That's getquip, QUIP.com/factually. So free your mouth today and save 20% site-wide, plus a free travel case and countertop stand at getquip.com/factually. That's getquip, QUIP.com/factually. It's 2025. A new you and a new year full of new possibilities. Well, don't let the bad times of 2024 bring you down. This year, reach new heights with Via. Trusted by over 500,000 happy customers, Via is the Swiss Army knife of wellness, dedicated to harnessing the natural benefits of hemp to create high-quality wellness products. Whether you're looking to improve your sleep, focus, recovery, add a little pep to your step, or just get high, Via has something for you. With products ranging from 0 to 100 milligrams of THC, Via gives you the power to blaze your own trail, baby. Via is well-renowned for their award-winning THC and THC-free gummies and vapes, THCA flower, soothing topicals, and calming drops, all crafted with the highest quality hemp sourced from trusted, independently owned American farms. And you know what the best part is? Via legally ships to nearly every state in the U.S. in discreet packaging direct to your door with a worry-free guarantee. No medical card required. My personal favorites are the sleep gummies. They really help me chill out right before I'm trying to get my snooze. It's really nice just to relax, put on some chill music, and chill out with my Via gummies. And get this, if you are 21 or over, you can check out the link to Via in our description and use the code Factually to receive 15% off. And if you are new to Via, you also get a free gift of your choice. After your purchase, they ask you where you heard about them, and please support our show and tell them we sent you this year. Enhance your everyday with Via. Why is it that it takes so long to get the results, right? I understand that when we're looking at national crime statistics, it's like it takes a while before you can say, okay, here's how many crimes there were in this particular year. We don't have sort of like up to the minute crime statistics most of the time. Is that a problem as well?
Oh, it's a huge problem. And this is one. So the FBI in late September came out with their 2024 numbers. Usually or 2023 numbers, excuse me. So usually there's about a 9 or 10 month delay.
Wow.
And the reason being that basically the agencies have until the beginning of April of the following year to report data, to find errors, to fix data, to audit themselves. So they send it up to the state. The state comes back to them, says, here, fix X, Y, or Z. Not every state requires them to send data monthly. So a state January 10th of 2024 may be seen in agencies' 2023 numbers for the first time. And so they send it up. The state makes corrections. The agency makes corrections. They send it to the FBI. The FBI puts it all together, builds all of their estimates, builds all of their tables, and then publishes it in September. It's an enormous issue. By that point, it's largely worthless, especially in a year where we're seeing declines. If you think back to the 94 crime bill and all of the concept of juveniles as super predators and all of this stuff that years later looked silly about how we're going to see this enormous rise in juvenile murder. And then November 95, the 94 numbers come out. We're in the midst of this discussion about how much worse crime is getting in America, and murder has fallen 4%. In 95, it fell another 7%. In 96, it fell another 9%. So we're making all these policies based on this increasing crime as this thing was getting better. It leads to bad policy decisions. And so what my company has actually done with a generous contribution from Arnold Ventures, which is this philanthropy that funds criminal justice issues, we built something called the Real-Time Crime Index, which is right now we have data from about 360 agencies nationwide. And we're basically able to, in near real time, we've got about a month and a half delay, track crime trends by looking at data from about 75 to 80 million people across the country. And so we're able to see these trends as they develop, not with exactitude, but I hopefully have brought about the point that the data the FBI is producing isn't exact either. So we can basically understand the national crime trends as they develop without having to wait that 9 or 10 month period for the FBI to put out data.
That sounds like a huge improvement, again, because elections are being decided based on this data of like, here's, crime, especially prosecutor, district attorney elections. For instance, we just had one here in Los Angeles that turned on exactly this type of data. And so more timely data is really important. Do you think that there is a political reason that we don't have better crime data? I mean, I understand you're a little bit more reticent to cast aspersions on law enforcement than I am, but there has to be a reason why. If I want to look at weather data in America, I can go on NOAA, the National Weather Service's website. They have up to the second data, that's freely available. They have a weather person in every single jurisdiction in the country. And the same thing is not true for crime, that we have this balkanized system that moves very slowly, that, is voluntary and piecemeal. And people care about crime a lot more than they care about the weather. People like the weather, but, it doesn't decide elections.
Well, it goes back to the original issue of this is voluntary. It's always been voluntary. And so the agencies do what the FBI asks for the most part, but the FBI can't tell agencies what to do. And so it leads to this situation where it's up to the agencies themselves, if they want to produce faster data, to do so. Now, I will say we have come across a much better environment for faster crime data because more agencies are publishing their data faster than ever. States like Texas right now has started to publish its data in almost as close to real time as possible of every agency that's reporting. And so we've got a situation where we have a better understanding of national trends faster than ever before, even if it's not a national phenomenon of every agency reporting. And we're never going to get that because it requires a level of commitment. And really, it requires the federal government saying you have to do this in order to have it get done for most places. And I don't see a world in which the federal government's ever going to do that. So I don't think it's political. I think it's hard to interrupt the momentum of what has been.
It's just inertia. Look, I also have concerns about if you were to nationalize law enforcement. I think there are concerns for how that would play out. And it does make sense for it to be location based, right? To be a local jurisdiction thing. But it creates, so much room for these bad numbers, for bad actors. Let's talk about why we've seen the changes in the statistics. You said around the pandemic, we saw a lot of major crimes and violent crimes spike, and then they went back down. Do we have any idea why that was?
That's a good question. It's something that I always preface this question whenever I get it with, we don't know for certain why murder spiked in the 80s and the 90s and why it went down very fast in the mid to late 1990s. And so I think that it's something that we can kind of look at the timing and show it was up, it was elevated relative to 2020 or toward 2019 in the first part of 2020. And then it spiked in the summer of 2020, immediately after the murder of George Floyd. I don't subscribe to the theory that the protests were responsible, but you had all of this, all of these protests. You had what you might call depolicing, where police in a lot of places pulled back on a lot of regular activities, either in response to the protests or in response to the pandemic. And you had all of this confluence of factors. And then you had this enormous surge in gun sales and gun carrying, which began before Floyd was killed. And the way that I looked at this with Rob Arthur, who I've written a bunch of articles with, is we looked at the share of traffic stops and arrests in cities that had data that involved a firearm being found. And we had about 10 cities of data that showed this enormous spike across all of these cities in March, April, and May of 2020, which suggests that people were basically carrying firearms a lot more often. And so you had this confluence of factors. I don't think the firearms was a cause, but I think it's sort of this accelerant on top of all of these other factors. And all of that led to this enormous surge in murder and gun violence. And it's the type of thing, like, if you give me the ingredients for the most delicious chocolate cake anybody's ever tasted, you can tell me exactly which ingredients and in what amount there are, and I still can't bake the cake because I don't know how to do that, and we don't understand exactly how the recipe is put together. And so we can kind of talk about what some of the ingredients are that likely led to it, we don't know whether one factor was most important than the other. And we also don't know, just because the factors that sort of led to the increase in 2020, those aren't inherently the factors that led to murder still being very high in 2021 and for much of 2022 before starting to surge. And so it's kind of, you can build a coherent narrative about what might have caused. Yeah. In 2023, murder fell, the FBI has it at 12%. And the largest one-year decline ever recorded was 9% in 1996. So we had the largest one-year decline in 2023. And then 2024, our data puts it about 17% decline. So we're looking at, on top of 2023, an even larger decline. In 2020, the murder spike was 30%. So it went up a really long way, and it has come down in the last 2.5 or so years.
So, we can't, we don't have the exact explanation for exactly which factors made the difference, but we can look at 2020 and 2021 and say, this is a generationally weird couple of years that you had almost everybody out of work, a lot of people out of work, a lot of people cooped up inside, a lot of people getting stimulus checks, right? So what happens? Maybe more people are buying guns, more people are cooped up with people they don't like. They have more time on their hands, there's and then we have the generational protests against the over policing of black communities, which causes a political response from the police. You have the blue flu, you have police withholding their services as a political response, or in some cases because they're too busy kettling protesters, and so put all of that together, right? And it looks like the spike makes sense for that reason. And now we're a little bit back to normal. We can't say exactly which of those things mattered the most, but it was like, we can look at 2020 and 2021 and say, those were weird years. That's the vibe that I'm getting from you. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And I think you also have to throw in the fact that because of the pandemic, all of the local government actions, all of the state government, all of the philanthropies and the nonprofits that would have worked to basically reverse this surge, those were not in operation in 2020, 2021, and most of 2022. So all of the tools that we really would have relied on, we didn't have at our disposal really until 2022, 2023, when things started to get back to normal. And so I think that helps probably to explain, you had all of this government spending, all of this government hiring, all of the nonprofits and the philanthropies that work with people at risk, that are working on the streets to interrupt cycles of violence. Those didn't exist in 2020 and 2021 for the most part, or if they did, they were severely disabled. Now we've got those back as tools, and that might, I think, help to explain why we're now seeing this really sharp decline back to where we were pre-pandemic.
It's just so frustrating because you saw, look, criminal justice reform is an issue I care a lot about. I was talking about it in my work far before 2020. Mass incarceration is one of America's greatest sins against its own population. Over-policing is a horrible thing. We were finally starting to make progress on those issues with the moment caused by the murder of George Floyd. But then you saw all of these people running against that movement saying, because of that movement, because of this progressive prosecutor, because of this emphasis on, having the police less involved in routine traffic stops or getting rid of stop and frisk, et cetera, it's caused the spike in crime, and we have to pull back on that. And we've seen that in LA, where I live, and in many jurisdictions across the country. But that, based on what you're saying, looks like opportunism, because the rise in crime was not caused by that change in policy. It was caused by how fucking weird those years were in the first place, that we had this pullback in services, that we had the pandemic, et cetera. It's just, it's very frustrating to see what looks like a change based on the fundamentals. There was an earthquake caused by COVID-19 and everything that came afterwards, that being blamed on the very necessary reform that we need to have in this country. I don't know if you have any stance on that, but that's what I'm thinking about as you're describing it.
Yeah, I think that it's a real challenge, because I think that we've put the prosecutor as crime fighter on a pedestal. And the issue is that, one, all of the research that we have suggests that the greatest deterrence is the certainty of getting caught, swiftness and certainty of getting caught, not the likelihood that you're going to receive a long sentence for anything. So what happens for the prosecutor, I think, is probably overstated from a preventing future crime or decreasing crime standpoint, which is not to suggest that I don't think the role of the prosecutor is very important. I do, but I think that we've kind of suggested that much of where criminal justice reform has happened is in the prosecutor role. And I think that the role of the prosecutor as someone that's going to reduce that is probably overstated. And you look at, murder clearance rates fell from 60% in 2019, 60-ish% to 52-ish% in 2022. You can look at especially the places. The Washington Post did a great series in I think 2018, the pre-pandemic timeframe, where they looked at what they called places where it was free to murder with impunity. And you can take New Orleans, for example, where I am, the French Quarter. Every one of the shootings and every one of the murders this year has been solved. There's been a clearance in every one of them.
Wow.
If you go a mile away to the 7th Ward, which has historically been one of the most violent places in the entire city, you're looking at like 1 in every 8 or 9 shootings and murders has been solved. And so the places where you're likely to have the strongest deterrent value in preventing future crime also happen to be the places that have the lowest clearance rates and are getting into the criminal justice system the least often. And then you can point at crimes like auto theft. Auto theft, we didn't talk about it, but auto theft surged a ton between 2020 and 2022. And then that video hit TikTok showing how to steal certain models of Kias and Hyundais. And it led to this enormous explosion in auto thefts. The auto theft clearance rate last year was 8%.
80%
of auto theft. 8.
Wow.
0.8% of auto thefts nationally. You can look at places like Seattle, where 70-something out of 9,000 auto thefts were reported as having been cleared by the Seattle Police Department in 2023. These are enormous issues that the prosecutor has no role in deterring future crimes as the crime fighter when you're talking about crimes that have an 8% clearance rate nationally, and in some places, 1, 2, 3, 4% clearance rate. And so I think that it probably leads to us pointing to criminal justice reform, which has this glaring, we're doing something different policy role to it, and kind of overstate the importance of it from a crime reduction or crime increase standpoint.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful, nuanced view of that, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Folks, it's a brand new year. So if we are going to set goals for ourselves, we have to set ourselves up for success too, right? That's why I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, Huel, spelled Huel, the global complete nutrition brand trusted by millions. Last year was busy for me, and honestly, 2025 is looking to be even busier. And while I love a leisurely morning routine, more often than not, I have to hit the ground running these days. And that is where Huel Black Edition Ready to Drink comes in. A full meal with a whopping 35 grams of protein plus 27 vitamins and minerals, all in one handy bottle. Meals on the go can be a major pitfall. Fast food can leave you feeling sluggy, and even worse, snack meals can leave you sluggy and hangry. And Huel takes the place of your most inconvenient meals while taking the guesswork out of healthy eating. It comes in delicious chocolate and vanilla flavors, and it is so affordable. You get a full meal for less than $5. Don't believe me? Well, guess what? Factually listeners can try an exclusive offer for new customers of 15% plus a free gift with the code Factually at Huel.com. That's 15% plus a free gift for new customers with the code Factually at Huel.com. Start your year off strong. Unlock a healthier, easier way to eat with Huel, nutritionally complete meals in minutes so you can focus on what really matters. Try Huel. So think about what personal information of yours is available online. Do you think that's limited to a social media profile or maybe an email address? Think again. There is an entire mountain of personal data out there being bought, sold, and traded by data brokers. Things you never intended to be public, like your home address, phone number, and even the names of your family members. This is more than just creepy. Anyone with an internet connection and bad intentions can find everything they need to wreak havoc on your life. And we are seeing more and more cases of harassment, identity theft, and even real-world stalking, all because this kind of sensitive information is so easily accessible. You know, when I became a target of harassment by people who found my details online, I turned to Delete Me years before they ever sponsored this show, and it was honestly one of the best decisions I have ever made. Their team of experts doesn't just track down your personal data, they remove it from the internet and they keep it gone. And I can tell you from personal experience that it really works. And everyone deserves to feel safe and protected from invasions of privacy like this. Delete Me can help make that a reality for you, your family, and your loved ones. So, check out Delete Me, not just for your security, but for your friends and family too. You can get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/Adam and use promo code Adam at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/Adam, promo code Adam. Let's talk about the general, issue of police staffing and tough on crime policies generally. You said that we don't really know why crime decreased between the 80s and 90s, and we're still figuring out why it decreased in the last couple of years. There's a lot of people in society who think, hey, the tougher you are generally, the more you staff the police, et cetera, the more money that you pour into our police departments, right? Police departments suck up an incredible amount of city budgets currently and have never really declined nationally. How much does that affect the crime rate? Are we able to say how much at all?
So there's a lot of research that shows that as you increase the number of officers, you do have a impact on the number of crimes, especially like things like murder, where I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's essentially a ratio of X number of additional police officers usually leads to Y fewer murders or fewer violent crimes. Mm-hmm. Now, it also leads to more arrests for what you might call trivial or for non-essential or non-emergency or non-violent types of action. So you get heavier policing, more officers, likely fewer crimes, but you're going to have more arrests. And so this is an issue that cities in normal times need to think about. There is a trade-off there. That said, nearly every large department since the pandemic has lost officers, and many of them have lost a ton of officers. Seattle, that I was just talking about, has lost like 30% of its staffing. New Orleans, where I am, went from around 1,215 officers and recruits in 2019 to 940 or so today. New Orleans spent $80 million on officer recruitment, on officer raises, on recruitment bonuses and retention bonuses. And when they did this, they had about 950 or so officers about 2.5 years ago. They're at 940 today. Police departments are losing officers. Cities are spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to retain them, and cities are essentially failing. Cities are still losing officers. The rate of loss has slowed down, but police departments, especially in big cities, are not growing. And it's a major issue that departments need to think about, that you can spend untold millions of dollars, you're probably not going to be successful. And so cities need to begin to grapple with, what can you do about this? And I always you talk about crime and police officers, but the bigger issue is that when you lose officers, especially by the hundreds, your response times go up. And so when your response times go up, New Orleans went from 50 minutes on average response time in 2019, which is not good, but was
50
the best we had.
50 minutes is bad. You call 911 and they come in 50 minutes? Like, you're dead.
On average. Now, for an emergency, it's probably going to be like 10 minutes on average. But okay. But on average, regardless of the call type, in April of 2023, New Orleans averaged 180 minutes on average response time. And so when you get that, you have incidents where I'm not calling the police, because if my car was broken into, maybe a couple of bucks were stolen, I'm not sitting here outside the bar at 2 a.m. for 3 hours as the department tries to show up. Or the other thing that happens is you call the police. They say, we'll send an officer as soon as we can. They send that officer in 1 a.m. when everything's quiet. You're asleep. Your phone's on do not disturb. The officer calls 3 times and then marks it up as unfounded or gone on arrival. And so you get this major community trust. You get underreporting of crime, especially with non-emergency crime. But we were looking in New Orleans and we found something like 40 in 2022, the first half of 2022, there was something like 40 something rapes that were downgraded from emergency to non-emergency. The response time skyrocketed and the share of those incidents that were marked gone on arrival went up. And so you've got this happening in city after city, and it has serious community trust issues. And you can't throw money at the problem to solve it from hiring more officers. And so what New Orleans did is they hired a whole bunch of civilians and they hired contractors to respond to non-injury traffic accidents. And so now the response times, despite the fact that they have no more officers, response times are back to that 50 minutes on average time frame. So there's steps cities can take, but they need to grapple with the fact. The question is not to hire more officers or not to hire more officers. It's, we can't hire more officers. What do we do now?
Well, it sounds like a pretty good solution to hire civilians to do things that we don't really need cops to do in the first place, like non-injury traffic accidents. Like, I don't think we need a lot of highly paid people with guns, dealing with fender benders. But the first question I want the answer to, and there's a whole lot I want to discuss here. The first question I have is, why are departments all across the country having so much trouble hiring more officers when, here in LA, they've done exactly the same thing. Oh, we have a big deficit of officers. Let's give them all raises. They give them all raises and there's no more officers. Well, great. Now you're spending a lot more money on the same people. So why is it that people don't want to be cops?
That's a good question. I think that the glamorousness of the profession probably has taken a hit over the last decade or so.
The glamour of stopping and frisking teenagers or like whatever it is. It's not. I mean, maybe at some point there was some glamour in like the 1950s when you just got to walk around with a shiny club and tip your hat to pretty ladies. But it's not a glamorous occupation now.
No, and I don't think as many people grow up wanting to be police officers. I think that the pay is not particularly great, especially considering in a lot of places to sort of make a living wage, you've got to work a ton of overtime. You've got to work details and shifts outside of work. Like it's not an easy profession. And there's a heavy spotlight on police officers, certainly rightly so. If you use of force incorrectly, you could end up being charged with a crime, and certainly rightly so. But it's a very difficult profession, I think. And it also takes a long time. And you're looking at background checks take months to carry out. And then you got to do physical fitness tests, and you got to do all 16 weeks of training and then 16 weeks of on the job training. And so it takes a really long time. And you could do that in a big city, or you can go to the suburbs and you get better pay. It's an easier job. You're not doing the really tough policing work as you would do in a big city. You're policing the local mall, looking for shoplifters, as opposed to trying to hunt down murderers. And it's just as much pay or more for an easier job. And so that's kind of what we see, that small cities and the suburbs are not having the same hiring issues as big cities are right now. And it's probably just, you go where there's the least difficulty. And right now it's just very difficult to be a big city police officer.
Yeah, well, I think it's because our big city police officers are doing the wrong things. I'm going to keep editorializing, and you don't have to endorse any of it. But, in our big cities, one of the things that we have our police do is, over police black and brown neighborhoods. Hey, let's just go around and drive around Brownsville, Brooklyn, or like South LA and just fucking bother people and crack heads and like be a sort of violent occupying force. And like, there's only so many people in our country who want to do that kind of work, like if it was actually what the best homicide cops do on the wire, people might have more fun. But when it's literally just, we're going to try to there's a bunch of poor people and we're going to try to keep them like segregated and poor and suppressed. That's not like a fun job to have. Now, that's my view of what a lot of city police do. It's not what every single police officer does, but it is certainly like the way that we've prioritized a lot of law enforcement in this country. I think though that another problem is that the police are not even that good. The police departments, as currently structured, are not even that good at giving us the feeling of safety. Like, I don't know a lot of people who see a cop, at least in LA where I live, and think, oh, good, I feel safe right now. And I'll give you an example from my own life. A couple years ago, I was walking down the street. I was walking home from the subway station. I'm lucky enough to live not a 15-minute walk from a subway station here in LA. It's nighttime. It's about 10 p.m. I pass a woman who is clearly homeless. She has no shoes on. She's not wearing enough clothes. She's holding a blanket and she's yelling, help, help. Like she's just out, she's yelling help, right? And so I stop, but this woman's yelling help. I say, how can I help you? She just keeps yelling help, help. That makes me feel unsafe, right? That's one of those things that we talked about. It's not a crime, but I'm like, oh my God, this is an upsetting thing to see on my walk home, right? That contributes to the impression that crime's out of control. I walk another block because I couldn't help this lady. I walk another block. I see 2 cops on the street corner. I'm like, oh my God, wonderful. Here are some cops. I say, hey, there's a lady down there calling for help. And they look at me and they laugh at me and they say, oh, she's just crazy. That was their answer to me. Now, this is a woman who clearly needs help. She didn't have, it was nighttime. She had no shelter, right? This woman could have easily been a victim of a crime the next moment. But the cops, the people who my city pays, my tax dollar pays to stand around on the corner and supposedly help people are completely unequipped to help that problem. And in the homelessness work that I do, I've seen similarly when there's a really bad problem, we need to call emergency services. Someone's having an overdose, something like that. The cops show up and they're often unequipped to deal with the actual human problems that people have. And so it seems like there's this mismatch where beyond the statistics, we have all the anecdotal stuff that you're talking about that makes us feel that crime is out of control. That feeling-based stuff is what the cops are uniquely unequipped to deal with under the way that American policing is structured in a lot of cities. I'm curious if you have any view on that or if that's just my editorializing.
No, it speaks to how we as a society have prioritized who we want to respond to certain things. And basically what we've done is we've said X is a problem. Let's have the police be the ones that respond to it. And I think you probably talk to officers that are like, this is, if this woman is, wielding a knife and threatening people, then the police are probably the best ones to respond. But if someone is nonviolent, going through a mental health episode, we as a society should have built a response mechanism that is not the person that is a police officer, because that is inherent. And a lot of police departments are doing a good job of training officers in crisis intervention, how to respond to incidents like that. But certainly not every officer is going to be equipped with that training. It's something that a lot of cities need to do a better job of having the tools to not call the police in that situation. And a city like Denver has their STAR program, which does this. And sometimes the police go along when there's a safety issue alongside the mental health episode. But a lot of times they will go without having any sort of support from the police department. And so it leads to a much stronger response. And even the STAR program needs to be beefed up. It speaks, again, to how do we as a society, your commentary, I don't blame the police department for being ill-equipped, because I think officers would also say that we're frequently ill-equipped to handle these things. It's just that we put this on the plate of a police department rather than actually solving the problems. And you look at the things that a lot of communities that you might call over-policed, it's not a matter of over-policing. It's not getting the right policing. It's having these communities where your likelihood of getting a pulled over and stopped and frisked and whatnot is really high, but your murder clearance rate is really low, even though there are high levels of violence. And so we should be prioritizing, fast response to incidents and solving especially the most serious crimes. I don't need a 90% shoplifting clearance rate, but we really shouldn't have a 50% national murder clearance rate that in a lot of places is 20, 30, 40%. We shouldn't have rape clearance rates in the single digits or teens. We should be prioritizing solving these crimes, getting justice, and ensuring that we have the deterrent value that comes with swift and certainty of response. So I think everything you've talked about speaks to the fact that our priorities of what we want the police department to do are out of whack. And we can't blame the police departments for basically city government failing to properly set up a situation where they can do the things that we really should be having them doing well and not putting on their plate the things they really shouldn't be doing in the first place.
I think that's really great, Jeff, and you help moderate and add nuance to my commentary really well, I think, because a lot of those neighborhoods that are over-policed where the police drive around and treat everyone who lives in the area as a suspect, right? This is the problem with stop and frisk. If you're walking down the street, oh, well, let's stop and frisk you because you might be on your way to commit a crime, et cetera. Those are the same neighborhoods where the murders aren't being cleared, right? Where there are real problems that would benefit from a more appropriate or more evidence-based form of policing rather than the, hey, let's just drive around and crack some heads approach. And similarly, like, why don't people want to be cops? Well, it must not be fun to get called to homeless encampments over and over again, where all you can do is take someone who's having a psychiatric episode and lock them up overnight, right? Because, okay, let's get them off the street tonight. That doesn't really benefit them, doesn't really benefit anybody. That's the only tool that you have. That's not really a fun job. You're probably not feeling you're helping society when you do that. When in reality, there is a real problem there that with a more appropriate application of government energy and force could solve, but we have not created a system that does that. Now, I do think that the structures of some police departments are at fault. We do have a problem with, gangs or cliques, as they want to call them sometimes, in a lot of law enforcement departments. But we also have, cities that have told their police departments to do things that are not effective. There's this very funny dichotomy that we have in crime where the people who complain about crime the most are often those who are not the victims of crime, right? The thing about homeless folks who live on the street is they are disproportionately victims of crimes. They are the ones who are being harmed, but it is the affluent people in the houses who have the political power and are able to say, let's do something about that. And their response is, they see someone's tent getting set on fire by an arsonist and they say, oh, the homeless people are setting their tents on fire. Whereas, often it'll be someone from the outside who says, aha, I can attack a homeless person. No one will do anything. So they'll say, let's sweep the encampment away. But actually, if you asked the unhoused person, what do you need from law enforcement? They would say something very different. And they're the person who's the victim in that case. And so we have this mismatch between who is setting the priorities and who is actually at need in law enforcement in general. I don't know if you agree with that.
I do. I don't know if you saw the Andy Samberg video that was just on SNL, the Here I Go, and it's all about Andy Samberg as a affluent white man in the suburbs, essentially calling the cops on everybody that comes across his lawn. And it's the most addictive song I've ever heard. It's been in my head for the last 2 weeks since it came out. But that's where my brain immediately went. That it is a problem, and it is because the people that are oftentimes yelling the loudest or are oftentimes yelling the loudest after an outlier event. So there is a heinous murder. There is a terrible tragedy. Something really goes wrong that doesn't frequently happen, but leads to policy choices to respond to this thing that very rarely happens at the expense of all of the stuff that happens basically every day, this everyday gun violence, the crime and issues that occur every day that are the not to say that the heinous murder is not a murder that we should be trying to solve, but it takes our attention away from this is an everyday issue that we're not developing effective solutions for. And so I do think that the loudest people tend to have a unfortunately oversized voice in what gets solved. And the answers from that are always this sort of tough on crime. Let's do things that we know tend not to work. I think that there are things that we can do that can have effective deterrent value, but it's kind of like boring solutions. It's not the, let's increase penalties and throw everybody in jail for as long as possible and be as tough on crime as we can be. It's a lot more, city investment in programs and in ensuring that cases are being solved, and in identifying and targeting people and places that are at significant risk with potential solutions. I think there are things that we can do, which isn't to say that a heinous murder where some kids in New Orleans, there was a carjacking where these 4 kids carjacked this elderly woman and her arm was torn off, and you can edit out the details of this and post if you want, but she ended up dying, and it's led to this these kids that we need to throw them in jail, and we need to be very tough on juvenile crime, and it's just horrific, just awful. This poor woman, but also that shouldn't be the thing that guides our policy solution to all of these problems, because it's fortunately a relatively rare thing. Even if you can kind of agree that this is just a horrific incident that it cannot feel worse for everybody involved in this.
The way you put it, there was something in there that you said, if we identified the people who are most at risk of crime and actually tried to reduce their risk, that would be policing that would matter, right? That would really help. And the problem is those would disproportionately be poor people who have less of a voice in our political system. And the priorities end up getting run by, the people who are less at risk, quite frankly. The people who are watching news at night in their big houses saying, ooh, I feel scared. Like when Rick Caruso was running for the mayor of Los Angeles against Karen Bass a couple years ago, an example he kept saying, this stuck out so much to me. He said, crime is out of control. People are afraid to wear their jewelry out at dinner. And I was like, wow, that's your priority, is someone who's scared to put their pearls on when they go to a fancy restaurant. That's not actually my concern. That's not the people who are most at risk of crime. That's someone who has an imagined problem. They're literally imagining someone is going to run up and steal their jewels off their neck at a restaurant. That's not who the victims of crime are in Los Angeles, even when crime was spiking. That's the problem in our political system. I think everything is downstream of that, in my view. We've kept you here too long. I want to ask you really quickly before I get to your policy prescriptions. You mentioned...
Can I respond to that real quick?
Oh, yeah, please say something on that.
I was just going to say, I think I would disagree that when you identify, and so there's all this research by this guy, Andy Papachristos at Northwestern University, that basically shows that if someone that is the victim of gun violence, your risk, it acts as a disease essentially. Your risk for future involvement in gun violence goes through the roof. And so you can use all this research to identify who is at risk for victimization. The key is not in developing and delivering policing solutions. It's in developing and delivering non-policing solutions. What can a city do? What programs can we involve somebody with? How can we deliver help to somebody that has done nothing wrong, has not been the perpetrator of a shooting, but is at really high risk, especially relative to everyone else, at being involved in a future shooting? And so you can send the police out to arrest them and do pre-crime, and we know that that's a terrible idea. How do you develop solutions that aren't policing that can work? And I don't think we have that worked out, but it involves combining policing data, policing awareness of gun violence with non-law enforcement solutions. And I think the city that does that effectively will have a real effective long-term solution to gun violence in its hands.
Oh my God, Jeff, thank you so much for that. Because that's the kind of correction I love to have. Because look, I'm a victim of my own media environment as much as anybody else, and talking to folks on this show, et cetera. And that adjustment of I was saying, oh, if we policed to protect people who are at risk, that would be great. You to come back and say, actually, it's not policing at all. There are non-policing things that we can do to protect those people. If we look at crime as an epidemic or a disease sort of model a little bit. Oh my, I love that so much. And I think that is the kind of solution that I think you could actually rally people behind if you could convince policymakers, right, to do it. And we're starting to have little glimmers of that here in LA where I live, and I know places like Denver, et cetera. It's just unfortunately been swamped by so much of the tough on crime reactionary resurgence we've seen in the last couple of years. So this is why I love talking to people like you who actually know your shit, because I can spout off and then you can tell me where I'm wrong. That makes for a great podcast, I think. Okay, so I want to ask you about shoplifting, because you mentioned it a while ago, and that was such a huge story right after the pandemic at 2021, 2022. You had all these stories about flash mobs, made for great clips, great footage for the local news, right? Of multiple people, running through a CVS or actually it was higher end places like that, jewelry stores, things like that. And it led to this, sort of national crackdown on shoplifting. We had a ballot proposition pass here in California that, turned a bunch of that kind of crime back into felonies. You have the state of California devoting extra resources to that. You have like Walgreens and CVS putting all their products behind glass and locking it up. And then later, Walgreens admitted that they had lied about their shoplifting statistics, et cetera. So it's a very sort of fraught topic. Has there actually been an epidemic of shoplifting, according to the statistics that we have? What is the cause and what are the solutions?
Maybe. You want to talk about a crime that is... do I have to elaborate there? You want to talk about a crime that is virtually impossible to measure. You're talking about something that the Bureau of Justice Statistics has a survey runs each year called the National Crime Victimization Survey. They find somewhere around a third of thefts get reported each year for all thefts. Shoplifting, maybe we're talking about 15 to 20% of these incidents getting reported successfully to the police. Wow. Then you're talking on an incident type that has a 10 to 12% clearance rate. So of the 20% of these incidents that get reported, maybe 12% get cleared. So you can do whatever you want from a prosecutorial standpoint. You're going to have no effect when you're talking about a 1-2% clearance rate in terms of the real number of incidents that occur. So it's an incident type that is extraordinarily difficult to measure. It's extraordinarily difficult for stores and for companies to actually be able to articulate, because they plop shoplifting and theft into basically this loss category, which is most frequently just, hey, we lost, somebody accidentally misplaced merchandise.
Yeah. So we rang up one by mistake and they actually had two, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so you talk about stores that are just not good at counting this stuff and understanding, did we lose something because it was shoplifted, or did we lose something because Joe did a poor job of inventory? And it's something that the stores themselves can't really articulate. And so I'm not saying that we haven't seen an increase in shoplifting. I don't think it helps that we've seen this surge in viral videos and how easy it is to do TikTok and just put stuff online and next door. And look, there's a Ring video of someone stealing a package from my door, and somebody else posted one 2 months ago. So we must have an epidemic. But that's 2 out of the 10,000 packages that were delivered on my block that got stolen. So we have no context there. You show an incident goes viral, the vast majority of shoplifting is going to be small stuff getting stolen. And then you have kind of this, it's an easy boogeyman, I think, for a lot of stores. So Target closed all of these stores in New York, and they closed them in Seattle and Portland. And I looked at the numbers, and the places that had the worst theft problems were not the stores that were being closed. It was the small stores. They had these stores in Portland. They opened them in not great neighborhoods. And they were these small, basically grocery-only stores that were opened on the block of 3 other grocery stores. So it was basically a poor business decision in a not particularly great neighborhood that, yeah, they may have had shoplifting, but it wasn't worse than anywhere else. And instead of saying, hey, our bad, we made a poor decision, it was, crime is forcing us to do this. That's a much easier thing to say than this was a business gamble that did not pay off. And so you put all of that together, and I'm sympathetic to the plight of stores that this may be an issue, but it's not something that they're measuring, and it's not something that I think lends itself to being communicated accurately and easily to the public to understand, yes, this is a major problem, or no, it's not. And if it's a problem that is solved by putting all the razor blades behind glass, you're not going to lose that much in sales. And if it solves the shoplifting problem, then, I mean, it's not great, but we've solved the problem without having to measure it. It's not a bad thing that things are behind glass because you've solved the problem. You don't have to close stores because you need more associates now to just go with their key and open it 15 minutes after you asked.
I don't know. I think it is bad that things are behind glass because I'll say for myself, I have just stopped purchasing things at CVS's and, my local supermarket because you push the button and nobody comes. I'm like, all right, I guess I won't fucking buy toothpaste, man. Like I'm buying other shit here, but I can't get in there. Like it is bizarre how many of these stores I think have really hurt their own businesses by sort of chasing this phantom. And it's a decision that I don't really understand because they must have cut their sales because the number of times I have been in these stores, press the button and nothing happens. Like it adds 5 minutes to your shopping trip, even if someone does come, is like kind of ludicrous. And they have to stand there while the associate is standing there watching you try to choose the best deodorant. You're like reading the back of the thing and it's stressful because they're like standing there jingling their keys, waiting to lock the thing up again. And it just makes it a bad shopping experience. But I agree that I think shoplifting though is a good microcosm of how bad the statistics problem is because as you say, hard to measure, hard to get, almost impossible to get any kind of overall statistic about. So it ends up going based on vibes. You have this huge media culture of that's inflating, the prevalence of it. And the companies have a political incentive to blame the crime, right? Because it covers up their own business malpractice, their own mistakes, and maybe they get some handouts or kickbacks from a city or a state government saying, okay, we'll really help you guys out because stores are struggling. It ends up being this perfect storm of, no evidence or bad evidence leads to bad policy outcomes for everybody. Now everyone is scared about shoplifting that might not exist. The shopping experience is worse. The companies are making less money, and we're maybe investing city or state resources trying to stop shoplifting that we can't even verify is real. So this is like a huge, this is a, it's a test case in how bad statistics and misinformation can lead us astray as a society. So let's go from here to find out what the hell should we do about it. In terms of, statistics is your the main thing that you focus on. Just in terms of getting better information about crime data, what can be done to change our information environment here so it's not so fucked, in a word?
Well, that's up to the stores. The stores have to measure it effectively. If the stores aren't going to be able to tell themselves what was lost due to theft and what was lost due to misplacement, we have no prayer of accurately understanding it. And so if the stores, especially the main chains, where I'm guessing the majority of shoplifting occurs each year, aren't willing to do that, then there's no way to solve this problem. There's not a data solution to it. It's just we think it's getting worse. We think it's bad. Let's just guess and try and maybe we're correct. And I don't know if there's interest from stores or for retail bureaus or things like that, but in the absence of that work, there's nothing you can do from a data perspective.
What about how can we improve crime data overall for our entire society?
So I've said this. I don't know if you're a baseball fan. I'm a huge baseball fan, but
I like baseball. Okay, I tune in.
So you familiar with StatCast?
Tell me for those who don't know, and also maybe me.
StatCast is this thing that Major League Baseball put into place a couple of years ago, where in every major and minor league stadium, they're using these fancy radars, these fancy cameras, and they're measuring everything that happens. So ball leaves the pitcher's hand. We can see the spin rate. We can see the speed. We can see the angle. If it's a curveball, we can see the break in the ball. It hits the bat. We can see the exit velocity. We can see the launch angle. We can see how far it went. And then we can measure what happened. We can show did the fielder take the step in and then back? Did the fielder take the optimal route? What was the catch percentage? We measure everything that happens on a baseball field. We need to do a much better job of that from the crime perspective. And that really means is that we need agencies to report data faster to their states. There's two ways agencies can report. And again, we're getting really into the weeds, but there's something called XML and there's something called flat file. Flat file is basically we jotted down on a piece of paper everything that happened. And then once every quarter or once every 6 months, we send it up to the state. XML is basically as it happens, we have a pipeline to the state. And the agencies that are reporting via XML are the places that are able to publish it fast. So Texas, every agency is reporting via XML. State gets it, the state publishes it. If you want the November numbers for Texas cities, you get that by like November 10th or by December 10th. So,
wow. Okay. So up to the minute statistics.
Up to the minute, more or less,
up to the month statistics.
And it's not correct. You're going to have, this auto theft was actually he forgot where he parked. And so you're going to have preliminary unaudited numbers. But if you can put an audit system behind that and you can kind of agree, okay, maybe we're understating the number by 1 or 2%. If I see murder is down 18% in this sample of 350 cities, maybe it's actually down 17%. I don't really care about that 1%. You're able to see trends as they develop. And so that's really what crime data needs, is it needs more agencies reporting faster, states being willing to publish the data. And I don't want to call it a workaround from what the FBI is doing, because then the FBI takes the data. It can still put it all into a format that's usable. It can then present its estimates. It provides us with the continuity over time, but it also allows us essentially to understand our trends as they develop and understand which agencies are having issues, understand which agencies are doing the right thing. We can focus on cities that are doing well. We can identify cities that when things are going well nationally are not doing well and figure out, okay, murder's up, but that's just probably randomness because the number of aggravated assaults and shootings are down. Or we've got a city like last year, Greensboro, North Carolina, saw a doubling of murder despite having a decline in nationally of 12%. So how can we identify these outliers? And it just can contribute to better policy. And I think, of course, the data guy is going to say that the problem is data, but if our data is not good, nothing we're doing elsewhere matters. And it leads to uncertainty. It leads to poor policy solutions. And so, the first step is a data step.
Yeah, and it leads to fear and on the part of the populace. If we don't have real information and people are just going based on the anecdotes, it tilts our entire system in a direction that is honestly what we're currently living with, where we are investing money in the wrong places and people are still frightened, et cetera. And so the first step is knowing what's actually fucking going on in the country. So I think that you as a data guy are exactly right in this case, and I thank you for working on this issue and coming on to talk to us about it. And also lead with this.
Lead this as the start. Put this at the start of the podcast, just so everybody knows everything that's going to come is correct.
We're going to clip this out and be like, "Thank you for being a data guy. Data guys are great." No, for real. And I also appreciate you adding some nuance to my heated Jeremy ads. So thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on. How can people find more of your work? And actually, what's a good spot if they really want to know what's going on with crime data? What is the most reliable source they can go to?
So I write a weekly newsletter on crime data and crime analysis, jasher.substack.com. Would love to have followers there. Our website, realtimecrimeindex.com. We update monthly. So usually around the middle of the month, we'll update for the preceding month. And so that's something that's going to be growing and hopefully will turn into this library of understanding crime data, analyzing trends as they develop, seeing historic data, things like that. So, the federal government is in charge. They produce the biggest volume of data, but because everything is inherently going to be imprecise and everything is really slow, typically with the feds, or if it's not slow, it's unaudited. There are solutions to these problems that can be found outside of just the federal government. So hopefully we're providing those solutions to people.
Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my God, thank you once again to Jeff Asher for coming on the show. If you want to support the show and all these conversations, head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. $5 a month gets you every episode ad-free. For $15 a month, I will read your name in the credits of this podcast and put it in the credits of every single one of my video monologues. This week, I want to thank the Dusty Shredder, Thortron, Samuel Montour, David Snowpeck, Eric Carlson, Scooty Chimkinuggy, Miss Me with the Fascism, Aaron Explosion, Robert Fuss, and Game Grumps. Thank you so much to all of you for supporting the show. If you'd like to join them, head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. If you want to come see me on the road in Dallas, Omaha, Nebraska, Toronto, Vancouver, Boston, Chicago, all these other amazing cities, Eugene, Oregon, head to adamconover.net for tickets and tour dates. I want to thank my producers, Tony Wilson and Sam Rodman, everybody here at HeadGum for making the show possible. And I want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next week on Factually.
That was a HeadGum podcast.